Hello and welcome to Chatz, a television podcast, Season 11, Part B, Angels in Chatz America. My name is Alan, and I'm joined as always by my best friend, Magellan, the angel of my eye.
Oh, that's sweet. Hello.
Hi. I should have come up with angel puns every week. Let me just go down them right now. The angel to my Buffy, the angel into my America, the angel to my apple, the apple to my eye, the angel of my nation.
The angel food in my cake.
The angel to my hair pasta. It's Magellan.
Yep. I don't know if I want to be like one of these angels in this though.
What's wrong with these angels? They're all fun. They got nice hats and sweaters.
Yeah.
It's cold in heaven though. That's the thing.
I wouldn't mind dressing like one, but they seem to live a miserable existence.
But that's the point, man. So do we. It's just a different kind of miserable existence with less momentum. That's what makes us human. Hey, guys, we're talking very sillily about a very serious miniseries, if you can't already tell. It's the Chatz Kids, and we're here to talk about Angels in America, the miniseries, the HBO miniseries. We watched the final two parts of it. Episode 5, Perestroika, Beyond Nelly, as well as Perestroika, Heaven. I'm in heaven. Magellan, let's talk about Beyond Nelly first. I want to jump out of the podcast and say, hey guys, Angels in America is a really interesting series. And as we've mentioned before, there's a lot of content warnings for this show. Death, anxiety, AIDS, homophobia, racism, religion, like all things that can be legitimately unsettling to folks. And I hope that I put some sort of content warning either in the description and or at the top of the episode, but also just, we're going to talk about some dark stuff. And some funny stuff though. There's, it's a blend. It's a melting pot, just like America. Wow. These episodes were both directed by Mike Nichols and both written by Tony Kushner, who wrote the original play, and they aired December 16th, 2003. Magellan, can you tell me what happened in Perestroika, Beyond Nelly?
In this episode, Lewis arranges a meeting with Pryor. Joe visits Roy in the hospital. Pryor drags Belize to the courthouse, and Roy paints a new view of heaven. Does Roy do that?
Yeah, when he talks, I guess Belize paints a new view of heaven in this one.
Yeah. But anyway, that's what happens in this one. What did you think of I guess these two episodes holistically, but more so the first one?
So I liked, I went into 5 kind of down, right? I was like, okay, 3 and 4 got a little weird. We're getting into some sort of strange angel stuff. I don't know if I'm like so on board as I was at the beginning of this miniseries. And 5 started off really strong. I liked the Mormon stuff. I liked everything with Belize. Obviously, I always do. I think that if anything, one of the weaker points of this overall storyline is Harper and Joe, because that started off as like easily one of the strongest plot lines and one that I related to a lot and like felt a lot of emotion with. But they kind of get sidelined, or at least Harper especially gets sidelined in favor of Joe with Lewis, which is fine and cool and leads to some intense scenes later. But it sort of felt like they ran out of things to do with Harper besides let her leave, and then in the end of the series, obviously deliver a fun monologue. But that was definitely my takeaway, especially as of episode 5. I was like, okay, we're building. We have Roy is finally on his like deathbed, really, and Lewis and Joe are figuring their stuff out. They're not just like this month of debauchery is finally coming to an end. Felt like we're kind of collecting our toys and building our final symphony here. What about you?
Yeah, the episode 5 really feels like it just has to accomplish a few things. I think of all the episodes so far, it really feels the most, I don't know what the word is, but it really feels like it's just trying to do things in the first half.
Almost workman-like.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. But then the episode builds towards, I think, some of the most staggering moments that it's had in the second half. Particularly, there's this monologue from Belize about what heaven is like, and I think that was like one of my favorite moments of the whole thing. But yeah, I agree with you. this story really just doesn't feel like it has to be this long. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think episode 5 is the episode where I felt the most like it was sort of showing its length. And I wonder if you could just pare down 5 and 6 and into one episode. But it was still really good. It just sort of felt a little long.
Yeah, there are moments that you want to get to. You're like the juicy moments, right? Joe and Lewis fighting and Roy dying and all that stuff. But I think if there's any value to this, or there's like the sort of best value of this episode, is that we kind of get to stew in this space for a little while before things change again. Because I feel like in Angels in America, there's a lot of time between. There's a good amount of time between episodes, and that's where a lot of the like forward momentum happens, if that makes sense. And so we need a little bit of time in each one to be like, okay, let's just have people talk about what they think right now about what's currently going on. Take a moment, and then we'll sweep the rug and like move everything forward. Like, it doesn't happen gradually over every scene. In my opinion, it kind of happens in waves, which can lead to certain parts of it just feeling like they're dragging because it's like, nothing's been happening. Roy's still not dead. Let's go, guys.
Yeah, and I think that also probably feels that way because I'm sort of treating this as like, okay, this is episode 5 of a 6-episode miniseries, so it's got to ratchet things up or get to these anticipated conclusions and moments that we're expecting. But probably a better way to conceive of it is this is act 2 of this part of the story. And so that's how, you know, a 3-hour story goes, is the middle hour is slow. And like you're saying, you're sort of examining the status quos that you're in before you return. You either go somewhere new or you return home in the last act.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that makes sense. I would recommend that people, I mean, at this point, you've probably watched it all if you're watching with us, but I wonder what the effect would be to actually watch the 2 halves in 2 halves.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, and each half you do it in one sitting. But anyway.
Yeah, I think that would actually help a lot when you're watching 3 and 4 and you're like, where are we now? Why are we now here in this space?
Yeah. Right.
Because there's a bit of a jump there. So there was a lot to like in this, in just even episode 5.
Oh, yeah.
I want to zoom in first on something that didn't seem important at first, but I really enjoyed. The Mormon Visitor Center, where Harper is eating her problems away, and Joe's mother, Hannah, is volunteering, I guess, because as I understood it from a throwaway line, she sold the house in Utah to come here.
Yeah, we learned that in this episode, that as soon as she heard Joe say that he's gay over the phone, she picked up her whole life and came out to New York.
Pretty buck wild. I think Hannah's characterization goes a lot of places here. In terms of, you know, she's one of the characters who's most purely guided by her faith and her religion. And like the reason she, for example, gravitates towards Pryor is because while he's a homosexual man and she doesn't approve of that, he still cares about spirituality and is a good listener and a good talker. So she naturally finds her. I thought that relationship starting to blossom it was one of the coolest things about these episodes, because I did not expect those two characters to meet and like find kinship with each other. Yeah, definitely. And they meet in this one, right? In the first half of this one, towards the end, maybe. Yeah, I want to talk about Hannah's character for a bit, because she goes places that I didn't expect. When she's talking with Harper here in the Mormon Visitor Center, you can tell there are sort of two ways to read her, like picking up everything and coming to go see her son when she hears this thing. One way to read it is like, you know, she's in this sort of place of absolute horror and like, oh my God, how could you? And you bad man, I need to fix you, or whatever. You've ruined the family. Yeah. And there's another way to read it as like, she is his mom and is really concerned about him. And the show basically over the course of it is like, yeah, that's what's going on. She's concerned. She's callous. And there's a moment where I think to Pryor, maybe she's like,
oh, I don't have pity. Like, I don't feel that, which we saw her express in the previous episode. But I found it really interesting when she's talking to Harper and she's talking about like, oh, I heard that the thing that makes people gay is when like boys are too close to their mothers.
Incredible.
And she's like, I must be proof of that. And in my head, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Is that really the relationship that you have with Joe? That you're like super close?
I understood that line as her saying, like, ironically, like, I clearly I'm proof. Like, she knows that she's not proof of that, or she's the proof against that point. But either way, she's thinking a lot about her relationship to Joe and using the sort of like new age knowledge of like homosexuality and like in parenting, that she thinks she can fit that schema, I guess, again, to use that word.
Yeah. I think I read it as her genuinely thinking that she has a close relationship with her son, but she's coming to realize that that's not the case over the course of these 2 episodes. And I think a big reason that she takes Pryor to the hospital and spends time with Pryor is because she like wants a son, kind of like that seems to be the relationship that they end up having. And it also allows her, now I don't know how far ahead of us I'm getting, but she clearly also is like, has some questions about her sexuality to a certain extent.
Oh yeah.
And like is using or exploring those questions through her budding relationship with Pryor of like, well, so what is it like to be gay? What's up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. At the time, especially, you have to imagine that a gay playwright like Coney Kushner is writing this character to give her own coming to God moment, but it's sort of like coming to gay. Like she's kind of going, wait a minute, the same way that other people are having revelations, she in a moment with an angel goes, oh yeah, that's what that was. That feeling in the back of my head when she talks about like, why would she basically, I think in talking to Pryor, maybe when they're in like the nurse's office, is like, oh, why would you like other men? Men are terrible. And it's like, wait, the gears are turning.
I'm having a discovery right now.
Hold on.
Yeah. Okay, that's in the second one, but yeah, we'll get there. I just checked.
Yeah. There's I got a lot of these parts blended together, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
The visitor center stuff in this one, we have Harper doubting what's worth like being around for anymore, and Hannah kind of trying to console her and be like, you can just like, you need to figure this out. You need to either is she telling her to stay or leave at this point?
I don't know exactly. I think they're trying to. I think she's saying to her like, Joe never answers the phone. Like, you shouldn't be waiting around for this guy. It feels like that's what she's saying to Harper.
Yeah, you're not. You and my son are not going to. It's not going to end up working out. Which makes the later scene, which is definitely in this episode, way more sad. When he does come back and they're on the roof, and he's like, "I'm ready to make this work," and she's like, "I'm not. I came to peace. I'm gonna keep saying this in this episode. She came to God a little bit." Not literally, but more in the sort of metaphorical sense of like, I understood what I've been missing and what I'm denying myself by being with you and choosing to move forward.
She does give him one final moment, though, to like one more time prove to her who he is.
With the final scene of the episode, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the passionless sex followed by like, check out this naked body. What do you feel? And he's like, I don't. And then she's like, cool, good. Nailed it. Yeah. Good to know.
But she's like finally ready to face the thing which is the thing that she ran away from in episode 2 or whatever.
Exactly. When she went to Mr. Lize's Antarctica playground.
Yeah.
I like the line here when she asks Hannah if she thinks that she herself, Harper, is a witch because she married a fairy. It's just just one of those lines that you're like, nice job. Great work on that. But yeah, also one of the cool, the sort of, so curious if this looks cool in the play. There were a couple moments in these episodes where I was like, this would definitely look better. This would definitely look better in a play. But some of them I'm like, this might be better here. I'm specifically referring to the Mormon mother who's in the carriage in this, like, it's like a mannequin museum section. Animates and becomes a real person who like talks to Harper. And it like looks as if they did was really cut the camera and replace the mannequin with a woman in like pale white makeup. I have no idea if that looks good or if that's just like a bunch of actors frozen. It probably is, or maybe like the rest of them are mannequins or something. But I enjoyed that, and it very much felt like, okay, Harper is having her. She's addressing the Mormon faith more so than any of the other characters are. The scene also features a part. This is where I think a lot of the best Harper lines come from. She asks Hannah, like, what's the origin of Mormonism, and she's like, oh, it's not the angel that we like, that Joe, the guy who founded the Mormon faith, Joseph Smith, I think. Yeah, right? We should look that up. But no, what the angel that he spoke to name was not Mormon, but it was Moroni. And she's like, why don't they call us morons? And she's like, well, because of what you just said.
Yeah, it's Joseph Smith.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I liked her kind of confronting her own faith in that way.
Yeah, I did too. I think I was a little dissatisfied, like you were saying, with sort of what's made of Harper, because it feels like this episode pays lip service to, because she's like, oh, look, the wife mannequin never talks, and it's like, okay, right. I get what you're going for there. And
she's a mannequin. Got it.
And then later when Joe is talking to his mom Hannah, and Hannah's like, being a woman is really hard or something. It's like, okay, I get what you're saying, Angels in America, but it kind of, I don't know. I think I just wanted more from like Harper's story, because it, like you were saying, it really feels like everything that we understood to be true about her in the first episode is just where she is, Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's fine, but I think there's just such rich deconstruction of like, what does it mean to be homosexual? What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to have AIDS? What does it mean to be a Republican? What does it mean to all of these sorts of things?
What does it mean to be?
Yeah, and like, I feel like the question of what does it mean to be a woman maybe is not explored in quite the same nuance as those other things, but I could be wrong.
No, I certainly agree. We're neither of us here are women, but or women identifying, but it's just like, yeah, the story kind of like sets the pieces for everyone else to have these big screen monologues, and meanwhile Harper gets to have this quiet, and I appreciate that's quiet, but just this realization.
I think it's a nice scene, but I just wish there was more stuff like it, I guess.
I feel you there. Yeah. And so she, eventually she runs into Joe back at the house on the rooftop. He thinks he can make up to her. He really wants to talk to her, but he doesn't want to listen to her. I think this is the key problem. Is he's still not willing to like address her needs and wants. He's just like, I'm better now, and I still think that you're important to me, and me, kind of self-centered in that way. They give it one more go. They have the saddest heterosexual sex of all time. And then he gets up and he says, I'm going out. And then she says, one more time. This is where the episode ends. I'm just jumping ahead because I want to focus on Harper here. She strips naked in front of him. And she says, do you see anything? And he says, and also asks him, why do you keep your eyes closed? Winks to camera. I know why he keeps his eyes closed, listener. He sees nothing. And she's like, all right, cool, great. And then in the second episode, she leaves his ass high and dry and goes to San Francisco. But we'll get there. So
I wanted to talk about Joe going back to Harper in the context of what's going on with him and Lewis. So you want to talk about them next?
Yeah, one of the early scenes of this episode is the beach the not a nudist beach scene is what I wrote here in my notes.
Yeah, so Joe and Lewis are on the beach walking and talking, and Joe is really just wanting it to be like this nice, like, hey, we're at the beach, we're happy, and Lewis keeps being like, but the Republican Party? Like, why?
The worst partner to have. Not the worst partner, but...
but Lewis is really trying to push for, we're not compatible. This isn't... There's not something here. And Joe's like, no, shh, it's okay. We're in love. And Lewis says, no, we're not. But I think there's a really important conversation that comes up between them where Joe is trying to comfort Lewis for leaving prior, basically, by saying, like, it's, I don't know that I would have done it. It's a hard thing to do, but you were really brave to do it, and you did what you need to, whatever. And then Lewis is sort of like, well, you left your wife. How do you feel about that? Because Lewis is racked with guilt over the thought of what Pryor must be going through. And Joe is basically like, yeah, I don't think about it at all.
No.
He doesn't feel any sort of remorse, at least what he's saying. I'm sure he does to a certain extent, but he's like, no, I'm happy. This is where I want to be. And then he says this thing where he's like, trying to get Lewis to stay, like, don't go back to Pryor, stay with me. And he says, like, sometimes being self-centered is the most generous thing that you can do. Which
I think I think that contradicts something I just said a minute ago, which is that when they're on the rooftop, and Joe is kind of being self-centered, I think he is taking that advice, and it's not going well for him. And I wonder if that's the series saying that it's bad advice from Lewis, or it's good advice from Lewis, and it's leading to the true good that Joe needed, which is to leave Harper.
Well, it's Joe's advice to Lewis.
Okay.
But I think the way that he intends it is, I actually don't think that him going to the rooftop is him being self-centered. I think that he's not, I think you're right to say that he's not listening, because she's talking about, the end times are going to be a fire instead of a flood. And he's like, okay, honey, get your coat, come home.
It's cold. Let's go home.
He's just not paying attention to a thing that she's saying. But he's there for her out of a sense of obligation or duty that he had been ignoring for the past several weeks. And I think what he was trying to say to Lewis is basically his advice to himself of, if you don't love someone, then going home with them and having passionless sex and closing your eyes and thinking about someone else and just being there for the sake of being there, that's not like a nice thing to do. That's actually pretty harmful. It's been ruining Harper's life for him to do that. But yeah, he like gives that advice to Lewis of, if you don't want to be with someone, then don't be with them. Don't make them be with you because you feel like you need to. And then he just turns around and does that to Harper one more time. Exactly.
And this is why I kind of like come around not liking Joe more than a lot of the other characters at the end of this, which is a bummer because I loved him early on, because he's telling Lewis to, being self-centered is the most selfless thing you can do. And he has so much love to give, but doesn't like care about himself. Like at one point, he literally makes Lewis cry in that beach scene when he's like, Joe, what do you dream of? And he's like, I don't have dreams. And Lewis just like immediately is like, that's so sad to me. Like, what are you working towards? What is your goal? And all he wants is for like tenderness and care and to support someone else and to make someone else feel good and just like satisfy these urges that he's been suppressing for so long. Like Joe is kind of a ship out of water or an anchor in the middle of nowhere or something like that. He ends this episode in a very rough spot, and it just seems like I don't really know what is a happy ending for Joe Pitt at this point.
Yeah, right. Because what it ultimately seems like the play, it feels like the play is telling us that Joe doesn't, we'll talk about this later, but that Joe doesn't have like a redemption arc here, right? And so it makes you wonder sort of what are his fatal flaws and problems exactly. And I don't know that I could really like fully answer that. I think part of it has to do with what he and Lewis are talking about, where he says to Lewis like, oh, you are an idealist. You imagine a better world. You need to not do that and just be happy with what's here. Mm-hmm. The world is unperfectible and you just have to sort of make do. And it feels like that kind of failure to imagine something better and just sort of be content with this pragmatic, it's a softer version of like Roy Cohn's view of the world of like, there's no heroes or value or anything like that. You just sort of carve out your little piece of things and subsist. And that's kind of what Joe is saying. I don't know that that's like makes him worthy of punishment necessarily, but I think that's where a lot of his like kind of sadness comes from.
Yeah, and I wrote as I concluded watching the first episode that it felt like everybody here ends alone, and everybody has a chance in episode 6 for some sort of redemption or a conclusion, except for Joe Pitt, because I mean, you know that Harper's going to leave him, and where I do think he sort of gets something, not a happy ending, but a cathartic ending, is Lewis basically tells him like, you need to figure yourself out, you need to reset. He actually says like, you're probably bisexual. You need to understand what that means and come to terms with your God. And you have a whole journey ahead of you still. Like you could theoretically make a sequel that's like, all right, what does Joe do in the 90s? Like what is a down on his luck single questioning Mormon bisexual man do in New York in the 1990s?
Yeah.
There's a lot of territory for him to still cover, and his life is not ruined. Again, he still works for like the highest branches of government and is like pretty successful there, but he just has so much character growth to go that it feels like we're leaving him in sort of a nascent spot where everyone else is kind of like having their conclusion, if that makes sense. We got him to like halfway, maybe not even halfway, and everybody else finished their arcs.
Right.
But there's the tragedy of it, right?
Well, that's ultimately a little unsatisfying, I think. But that's, I guess, sort of part of the point. Mm-hmm. And it feels like that is... that like the fate of Joe Pitt's character is ultimately political in this way that I'm not quite sure how to feel about. But I guess, I don't know, I guess it makes sense. But it's just sort of like, you're a good man who chose to follow and make peace with the, you know, truly like vile characters like Roy Cohn or someone like that. Like you're an upstanding guy, but you go to Roy Cohn's house and you go to his hospital room and you're his protege, and yeah, there's something
you haven't squared those two aspects of your identity yet. You're living like two completely opposing lives as well.
Yeah, and I think it makes you think about the thing that you want for Joe Pitt is to self-actualize and live life on his terms.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how him being able to say to the people around him, like, I'm gay or I'm with a man or whatever, actually isn't him self-actualizing. Like you would expect that is. But as you've been saying, his relationship with Lewis is really not any different than his relationship to Roy Cohn or the Republican Party or something like that.
Or even to Harper, you know, he's getting the thing he wants, or he's getting the sort of feeling of stability, but not the actual stability. He's replaced one temporary bandage with another one.
Right.
That's sort of the arc that Joe gets in these stories. And I really like that the rest of this episode bounces back and forth between Pryor and Lewis reuniting and Roy Cohn and Belize kind of that relationship deteriorating, as well as Roy's health. I think we both found this reunion between Pryor and Lewis to be really uncomfortable. And honestly, if I'm being honey nut really is with you, it kind of put me against Lewis for a while. I was like, he
handles this so badly.
Catastrophically badly. I mean, this is a dying man who is like sensitive to sunlight and thinks that he's had a religious experience where he believes himself to be a prophet. And you're asking him, you're saying, you know, to be fit, like, and it's tragic because this is a very realistic way that this conversation would go, right? Is you reunite with your like sick ex partner, and you're like, yeah, but it's not only my fault. You were hard to deal with too. And like, you know, naturally, I'm going to feel bad too if I'm Lewis. And the first thing Pryor says to me after all these months this month is, fuck you, you little shitbag. Like, okay, yeah, I know I should feel bad. Yeah, I kind of deserve this, but it's not a two-way conversation. It kind of feels like Lewis just wants to be forgiven and have things go back to normal.
Yeah, definitely.
And like ultimately, both of them really want that, but Pryor has a lot of things to go through right now. You know, Pryor literally says in the second episode, like, I want to just roll the clock back. I want to just do this again. But he can't even look at Lewis as he's apologizing. and Lewis is blaming Pryor for being difficult. And then Pryor finally hits him with the KO blow of like, he's saying like, I had to get back to me when you actually have bruises on the outside of your body. He's like, my heart is bruised from you. And he's like, yeah, well, I'm literally bruised because my skin is not good right now.
Yeah.
You're telling me you're crying, but I think you only know the idea of crying, the idea of love. Like you're not even expressing your real feelings anymore, or you don't have them.
Yeah. Right.
It's heartbreaking. I haven't experienced a conversation this intense exactly before, but to have somebody that's like really intimate with you kind of open you up like that, especially in a public place, is so painful and awkward and uncomfortable that this scene really got to me. Of all the emotional scenes in two very emotional episodes, this one especially, I was like, oh God. Yeah. Oh, this was supposed to be great. These two were supposed to get back together and be so in love again, and it's not happening here.
Yeah, well, and that's why this scene, that's why I feel so weird about Joe not really having a redemption or resolution, but Lewis does, because not to say that Lewis doesn't deserve a redemption, but like I feel like if Lewis deserves one, so does Joe. Yeah, because Lewis is just being such a jackass in this conversation with Pryor, where he's like, thanks for seeing me. Anyway, it was your fault that things went the way that they did.
Yeah, come on.
And also, I'm not seeing anybody new. No.
Just
like,
sometimes, just once or twice.
Teeth about it.
Yeah.
It just is.
That's the straw that broke the camel's back, is when he's like, are you seeing anyone? He's like, no. And he's like, yeah, you are. And he's like, define seeing. He doesn't say this, but he's like, define seeing someone.
Right.
We have regular sex.
And, this scene makes you respect Pryor even more for being sort of strong and brave in the face of that, to say, like, listen, in my weakest moments and the moments of, where I was feeling the worst, I was begging for you to come back. Now that you're here, like, fuck you. You're going to fuck me over again. So
don't come near me again unless you have something to show.
Yeah.
And I think the reason I was saying earlier that I love that these two, we're going back and forth between this scene and the Roy stuff. The reason I love that is, and this is clearly intentional, right? Is Pryor says, don't come near me unless you have something to show. Meanwhile, Roy is literally showing the quote unquote showing the blood as he says goodbye to Joe and like dies almost in front of Belize. Is like, this is what it looks like when you bare your physical self to someone, is you're a mess.
Yeah,
Roy is worsening and worsening by the hour, it seems like. He chats with Joe Pitt briefly because Joe wants that salvation again, wants the feeling of like, do you at least appreciate me, Roy? Are you gonna like help me out? And Roy just is taught fully in like self-centered mode. After I die, they're gonna say I did it for the money, he says. Like, he's mumbling, he's bleeding, he doesn't want to sit down, he wants to control Joe still. It feels like Roy just hasn't learned here. He doesn't have his moment of kindness. He doesn't have his moment of redemption. As he's lying on the bed, he actually expects to see Ethel Rosenberg again. But now, I honestly thought they were gonna like not bring her back. And it's like, oh, you wanted to see her, but now that you're so close, you don't get to see her anymore. But the series decides to have a little bit of fun with that and does bring her back at the very last moment in the next episode. But yeah, so Belize comes to take care of him after he bleeds out. I love the way that they handle the bleeding scene, because it is pretty violent, but also this is a man with AIDS, and so they're like, Joe, you need to take that shirt and burn it and throw it away and clean yourself. And when the janitor comes by later, and he's another, I believe he's also another person of color along with Belize. And the two of them look at each other as he wraps up the biohazard bag and kind of have this like nod as Roy is like shouting racial epithets. And he's like, yeah, we're cleaning up this chip bag. It's like AIDS infested blood. This is our job. It's like just a very brief little subtle moment, but I really appreciated it. And Belize kind of takes the control a bit here. He asks, because at one point Roy is like, I don't actually know your name, which is hilarious that he's gone all this time and never learned his name. And he says, Norman Arriaga. It's Belize to my friends, but you, sir, can call me Norman Arriaga. And he's talking about like, oh, you should hire a lawyer. It's good for the soul. Sue somebody. It's good for the soul. And I think, yeah, then we get that brief moment, a scene where Pryor takes Belize to meet Joe. This was weird. This was a weird thing.
But can we go back a little bit before we go there?
Yeah. That scene's kind of self-contained. I want to talk about more about Roy in the hospital.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Roy and Joe a little bit because the inciting moment that causes Roy to take out the IV or whatever is connected to his blood is when Joe tells Roy that he's with a man, and Roy's like, "You're with a man?
What?
You're with a man?" And he's like clearly so angry and so hurt because that is what he's wanted this whole time. Is Joe, and he's sort of like probably gone back and forth in his head of like, okay, well, is he gay or not? What's up with this guy?
Yeah.
And it was just, it's so interesting to see Roy, he's clutching Joe's shirt, blood is leaking all over him, and he's telling Joe basically to cut off this relationship with this guy and to never tell anybody about it, or you'll regret it. And I was wondering, well, what is it that's motivating Roy Cohn to say and do that? Is he jealous? Is that him giving political advice in line with what he said in the first episode to his doctor about how like a homosexual man is someone who gets nothing done, and he's giving Joe like career advice, I guess? Is it don't do that because you could put yourself in danger of getting AIDS like me? You know what I mean? There's just so many layers there to that being the thing that sets Roy off, and that being their kind of final interaction, and I found that really interesting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I ended up gravitating more towards the Belize stuff, but I thought this Joe scene was very potent because, Joe is coming to this, like, can you give me one last piece of guidance as you seem like you're going to pass soon? And Joe and Roy, upon finding all this stuff, is, like, reacting almost so theatrically that I almost thought he was, like, faking it, Or he's like, obviously this doesn't bother me, or obviously I knew, but like it's all about appearances, and he literally can't drop appearances on his deathbed. Is how I interpreted this. Is like the heterosexual ideal that Roy Cohn like imagines his public self as is the person who would scream at Joe or whatever and be like, get the hell out of my hospital room.
I see. It's interesting.
The tragedy of Roy in these episodes, and we'll talk about whether or not we think he's a sympathetic character at all, but the tragedy is that he never learns to turn it off. Yeah. Literally to his dying breath, doesn't know how to stop doing this.
Right.
But yeah, I thought that stuff was really strong, and the actor playing Joe does a really great job of reacting to Al Pacino, which must be one of the hardest things you could ever do.
Yeah, definitely.
Ethel does return, and then Roy is like, "Oh, there's nobody with me now but the dead," which is very sad. And Belize goes off with Pryor, like I said earlier, to chat with to meet Joe, because I guess they found out where he works, and he wants to like just look at him. And they have a very good gay moment where they're like, "Oh no, he's hot! Oh shit, he looks like the Marlboro Man." They're both like, "No, Spurs and everything."
That's funny.
I like that scene a lot. I liked, Belize being like, you better keep, or I think actually Pryor says, you better keep files of all the hearts that you break. And Belize like covering his face, being like, he's not supposed to see me. And he's like, wait, aren't you the nurse? And he's like, no, I'm nobody. Je suis une femme. Like whatever. It's just, I'm no one. I'm lady. But yeah, then we get some really good dramatic stuff here towards the end of the episode. We get a very rainy scene in Central Park. Belize and Lewis meet by the Angel of Bethesda from the theme song. It becomes like a key set for the rest of the episodes. Lewis made it all this time without realizing that Joe works for Roy, which surprised me a lot.
Yeah, since they work in the same... He doesn't work for Roy, I guess is the thing. He's a clerk for one of the judges. And he just like... Roy has kind of been mentoring him in a way.
Right.
So maybe that's why Lewis didn't know, but yeah, that it seems weird that he would be working in the same workplace as Joe and he wouldn't have caught wind of that up to this point.
There's a lot of like people just misconnections in these episodes. But Pryor also lashes out and says that, Lewis lashes out and says, Pryor chose me over you, Belize. You always loved Pryor, Walter, and all this stuff. And Belize is like, honey, I have a boyfriend. I've had one for like a long time. Like, stop, you're being a child right now.
Yeah.
They talk about ideals. They talk about how this is very true. I love this moment. It kind of parallels the diner scene from last week where, Lewis is talking about all this ideology. And then here Belize is like, literally big ideas are all that you love. Like you don't want to like the material reality of what it means to be in America. You like the idea of being American. I thought the speech was one of the best speeches of this series.
Yeah.
Belize gets like several scenes in a row where I'm just like, Jeffrey Wright should be winning every single Emmy of all time. It's not fair. But yeah, he's talking about how America doesn't love people like me. He says, literally, I hate America. I hate this country. You're allowed to love this country, but it's not for me. And then, we get to Belize and Roy Cohn. Do you want to speak a little bit about these scenes?
Yeah, there's this really... I don't even know how to describe it, but there's this scene where Roy comes stumbling out of his room, and is a little bit delirious because there's morphine in his drip now. Mm-hmm. And he seems to recognize Belize, but maybe doesn't. And then he kind of asks Belize, like, okay, well, what happens? What happens after? What happens after you die? And then Belize goes into, well, before that, they're like doing all this close talking and like
it's a little intimate.
Yeah, like Roy wants Belize in that way, and Belize is kind of playing along with it to, I don't know, fuck with him or get him back into his bed or, just play out some of the just hatred that he has for this guy.
Yeah.
And then they have this conversation where Belize starts to explain what the afterlife is like. And he basically describes heaven as like it's a city, it's San Francisco, and, all the buildings have been torn down or are being torn down, or the windows are blown out and there's plants everywhere overgrowing everything. And he's talking about how everyone in heaven is mixed race and their gender is ambiguous. And he just, describes this really detailed, incredible picture. And he does it with this mix of venom, but also triumph and like sexuality too. Jeffrey Wright really pours a lot of different things into it. And then there's this exchange where Roy Cohn goes, and then one of the lines is, race, taste, and history are finally overcome. And then there's the switch, and he looks at Roy Cohn and he says, and you ain't there.
No.
And then Roy Cohn's like, okay. And what about heaven? And Belize says, that was heaven, Roy. And Roy's response is, oh, the fuck it was. It's just like, I don't know. It, for all the things that we said about in the first episode about the shortcomings of the show with regard to race, it really is. That monologue, I think, is the best that the miniseries is on race at any point in it. Because it's this moment where, again, Belize can sort of create this very triumphant ideal of what heaven could look like. And he can also say to this really vile man, like, and you don't get to be a part of that because of who you are and what you've done. Right.
Like, obviously, all of this stuff is like wildly unprofessional for an actual nurse to say. And like in the final episode, like as Roy is dying and Belize is like stealing and doing all this stuff, but you feel so much sympathy for Belize because this is the only moment in his whole life that he's going to get to do this. And Roy Cohn is a cultural figure. This is like so profoundly important to him that he'll take every last drop of satisfaction he can out of this interaction, including describing a beautiful portrait of heaven and ensuring that Roy Cohn will not be there, despite how much work he's done and helped and tried to become powerful and form a good alliance with all these people. It's like, no, you're not going anywhere, dude. You're just gonna die. You're not getting any of that.
And it's interesting to think about Belize's image of heaven in comparison to all these other ways that characters interact with their spirituality. And, you know, there are some similarities with Pryor's descriptions where heaven looks like San Francisco and it's this place that's been damaged by earthquakes and is stuck in time to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. But Pryor's conception of heaven, and even when he goes, race is absent from that, right? Mm-hmm. Like there isn't any consideration of what race could mean or what race doesn't mean anymore in heaven. And there isn't any sort of, you know, Belize is not Mormon or Jewish or really religious in any way that I could discern.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about the centrality of race in his conception of what the afterlife is like, or the sort of like triumph over race as a concept, was really cool. And I think our criticism from the first episode still stands of like, you could just make the story about that. Like that could be at the center, and it is a little bit off center in a way that's kind of, I don't know what the word is, but you would like for that to be centered more.
Right. It's a more, I think, realistic portrayal of this time period. That's who these stories happen to.
Yeah. And it's a more interesting conversation about like what are the angels all about? What is heaven? Like, you know, there's just an extra dimension to it when Belize is the one who's conceiving it and talking about it that's absent from everywhere else in the story.
Belize has the terminology to refer to things the way you would talk about religion, right? Him and Roy are each other's negation, they say, which is a very religious concept. This idea that there's somebody who is your opposite in everything. I think Roy at one point he's the first one to say it because he's like, oh, you're the N-word night nurse. You're everything I'm not. You help people in the evening, and you are a person of color, and you are gay. Like, you're everything I'm not. And it's like, actually, there's lines to be drawn there, but you guys exist in a sort of parallel world to each other.
Yeah.
I think Belize really steals the show in this episode, and honestly in this series, if I'm being real with you. But
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, that scene, probably the best scene of the episode, and the rest of it goes as we mentioned. It ends with Harper naked, and everybody's kind of alone at the end of this one. It's a bummer. Even Hannah turns to God at one point. She's trying to help Pryor out. She brings him to the center, or he like knocks on the door of the Mormon Service Center. She tries to take him to the hospital. No one will take him for a while. He wants to go to a certain hospital, and none of the taxis are available. Just a bleak final second to last chapter for us to lay on before we go to the next one. So with that, do you have any stray notes, Magellan?
No, let's close this puppy out.
Heck yeah. We will be right back, folks, to discuss the final episode of Angels in America, Perestroika, Heaven, I'm in Heaven. Hey everybody, we're breaking in here for a quick email discussion segment between the episodes. We got an email this week from friend of the podcast, Nick, who says the following regarding Angels in America play versus series. Watching this, and the more it goes on, the more I think like I would have rathered a play version. It's not that it's not working, but just that so many times I can easily imagine how it looked as a stage production. And that sounds maybe better. And so quiz to you guys is which one would you prefer? The way that Angels in America was made, or a filmed play version? Think Hamilton style.
So he's saying like either a behind the scenes documentary type thing or that. Is that what he's saying?
Well, I think he means like...
Oh, how the HBO series was made.
HBO series or like filmed play. Which one would you rather watch? Because there is actually, I believe, a filmed play version of Andrew Garfield and Nathan Lane's run on Angels.
I don't really like watching filmed plays. I think they just sort of lose something because, you know, in TV or cinema, your attention is being curated by the camera.
Yeah.
And in theater, you actively curate your own attention, and the production sort of like guides or suggests where you should look. But then when that's filmed, I don't know, then they make choices in the way it's filmed that like are just kind of half steps towards what would happen in a filmed version.
Yes.
So I'd rather just go see it live personally.
Yeah, I enjoy a good filmed play here and there, and accessibility issues with Broadway aside, if you don't have another way to
Sure.
see a play, that'll certainly get you there. I like the filmed version of Hamilton just fine. I think it's a good production, but it's also like pretty well directed.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that Angels in America, the HBO series, is also well directed. I noticed in editing them that often we're just calling it the play, like not even referring to it as a miniseries, because it's like easier to discuss. Like when we talk about writing and theming, like we're talking about a play here. But not enough can be said about like the directorial work that by Mike Nichols and company that like brings the visual style of Angels in America to television. That's a unique and specific talent that they bring to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think honestly the spaces where I would rather see a staged version are like the more fantastical parts of it. But for the most part, I think that the film version does justice to a lot of the content of the play.
Yeah. There's a moment in the final episode, which you'll hear us discuss after this, where it's just like people talking in front of a fountain. And it's like, I think we do make a comment that like, oh, that really would have just worked better as like in a play. You wouldn't think it's weird that there's like people in the background talking as much. So there's certainly moments in this specific adaptation where I'm like, I would have rather just watched this.
Yeah.
So I think my easy answer is, yeah, I would rather watch this not as a film play version, but in person. But if it's literally filmed play versus how it was made, I would actually rather watch the miniseries.
Speaking of the play version, we got a very detailed missive from a close friend of the show. So I don't know if we've ever mentioned her on the show, but our podcast art was done by a friend of mine named Camilla Franklin, who we credit in the show notes. You can check out her work there. And she actually saw the most recent Angels in America production on Broadway when it was there. I think she said she went in, 2018 or something like that?
I believe so, yeah.
And so she sent us this huge breakdown of her thoughts on going and seeing the play. So we're going to talk about that right now.
Yeah. She does open by talking about the experience of seeing it and the different ways you can access it. She saw it in one entire Saturday, so matinee, Millennium Approaches in the afternoon, and then Perestroika in the evening, which ends up being like, I think she said like 8 hours of just acting.
Yeah, she said you see Millennium Approaches at 1 p.m., take a break for dinner, and then come back and see Perestroika at 7.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
But I think we also say in the podcast episode that people are listening to, like, people should try to watch even the miniseries as like part 1, take a break, watch part 2.
Yeah.
Like watch all of it. Because the way that we watched it kind of like goofs up that pacing a teensy bit. Mm-hmm. So definitely seeing the play fixes that issue a little bit.
Yeah.
And then she goes on to talk about the sort of directorial vision of the play version, something we didn't think about, but they go for a bit of a different aesthetic. It's not just going for this like realistic 80s look, but it's more of a heightened, like heavy neon, suggestive look, which sounds really cool. I remember when I saw Chatz back in 2019, not on Broadway, but in Boston, they did a lot to like make it feel like the 80s without just doing that, like without just going all neon or all, 80s music. Mm-hmm. And then she talks about like the merchandise and stuff and just sort of the accoutrement around that. Camilla makes a great point here about the way that plays teach you how to watch them and how visual language and style can kind of get you.
Yeah, what I was just saying was kind of stealing a bit from what she said, actually.
Yeah. Introducing things like turntables, moving backdrops, spotlights, scrims, what have you. Establishing what kind of tricks are in the bag of tricks to help tell the audience how to sustain their disbelief. And understand how technical choices advance the story and theme. I think because she talks in here about how like the scene where the book appears in a burst of flames in the hospital room is definitely something where in the play, because they use like a pyrotechnic effect, it's like, whoa, that's so cool, and like everyone like screams and it's impressive and it's a brief moment. But like, this is one more example where it sounds a lot cooler in the play, because in the show it's just like there's some N64 CG on the screen, oh god, and then it's gone. Like it seems a lot more exciting to see like practical effects there in that version.
Yeah, and the kind of point that she's making overall is that the play sets your expectations of like how scene transitions happen, how the stage is set up, and then starts to break your expectations in very strategic ways, which I think are places where in the miniseries we thought that didn't work as well, because they just came off kind of goofy, and like the CG calls attention to itself being a little bit out of date. But I'm sure in this version, in the play, when everything is, you know, mechanical and whatever, it probably works a lot better.
Practical. Yeah.
She also talked a bit about the interpretation of the angel in the stage play, this particular production of it, which I thought was really interesting, and brought up a criticism of how the angel is portrayed in the miniseries that I hadn't considered, which is, and we'll link this, there's this great Vulture article that's basically an interview with the director of this production, as well as Marianne Elliott is her name, as well.
Puppetry designers and directors of movement.
Yeah, and the woman who played the angel, Beth Malone. Yeah. So they basically are talking about the different aspects of the angel, but the idea is, instead of portraying the angel as this sort of like, you know, classical Renaissance painting portrayal of an angel played by a beautiful woman, and there's all this light and purity and stuff, they were saying how, well, the way that heaven is described in the play is that it is in the aftermath of an earthquake and God abandoned it. So like, this is an angel who should be crawling out from underneath the rubble and should be like grungy and dirty and a little feral. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you can look up images of the play's version of the angel, and it very much has this like, you know, Camilla compares it to like a duck versus duck after an oil spill. It looks dirty. It looks twisted and gnarled in a really cool way. Honestly, I like it a lot. She compares it to BioShock Infinite, which I thought was very appropriate. That sort of like fallen Americana look. I like that a lot. I didn't realize that Marianne Elliott actually did work with puppets in War Horse, which is a movie I haven't even thought about since it came out, and I didn't know it had puppet work. Or the play, excuse me. Oh, but that makes more sense. I was like, there's no way she did puppet work for Steven Spielberg's War Horse. Okay, makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I thought was cool with the angel puppet that Camilla brings up is that the wings are, or I said angel puppet, the angel. The wings are puppeted by dancers who are called like shadows, and they're dressed in all black and moving around. That just sounds pretty cool.
Love it.
The next thing that Camilla brought up is she raised an interesting debate about something that we've talked about before on the show, which is the way that she phrases it is this sort of controversy over like who gets to play queer characters.
Yeah.
What did you think of what she had to say here?
Yeah, it's a fascinating point, and it's a debate that comes up a lot. I'm sure it's been going on on Broadway for much longer than we talk about it on TV. But you know, Lee Pace was basically forced to come out from an interviewer who was like pressing him on the issue a lot. And so even though he is a queer actor playing a queer character, it's like feels like he was pressured in a way. And then you have Andrew Garfield, who's playing an even more queer character, who like at the time of like the initial run of the play identified as straight, but since then has kind of like changed his decision on that, or changed his view on that. And so Camilla makes this great point about like, sometimes you put on these costumes and you play these characters and you realize something about yourself. You like understand something about yourself. It actually specifically reminds me, because I think that's a very common experience for like younger queer folk, is like, I didn't get it until I saw it or until I played it. And there was this I took this gender studies class in college, extremely on my bull, and we watched this little documentary about a bunch of people who were like asked for the sake of the show to transition for a week, to like temporarily, which was weird. This is like from 2002 or something, so it was like, you know, different time. And this older person who did it, everyone else, like, they followed them for a while and they like dealt with their struggles and whatnot, and then when, you know, female to male, when he went to the end of the show, they couldn't get an interview with him because he was just like, I'm just gonna live my life. I don't want to give these like clothes back or this identity back. I've like decided that this is me. Everyone else was like, it's weird playing a girl. I understand what girls are going through now. And he was like, I think I get something about myself. So like I said, that definitely happens.
And there's also this concern that she brings up about like, people have the right to maintain their privacy,
of course,
and if you are sort of demanding that, like, in order to play a queer character you need to be queer, you're kind of like saying that people need to, she says, like, there's a need to test or no, this is a different thing, but if you're asking that, then you're basically asking people to come out the way that Lee Pace was sort of pressured to do, which is problematic. But then she also acknowledges that the corollary to that is there are straight actors who, quote, play gay as a demonstration of, like, look at my range, which is definitely
bad,
not kosher. So it's complicated. It's what we're arriving at here.
It's definitely not as simple as, like, just hire, like, queer actors to play all these roles, you know? And then it becomes different when you're talking about race as well. I think Angels in America, though, it does have, like, unavoidable racial casting. Like, you can't make Belize white, and you can't make Pryor, or you can't necessarily, we talked about this, so you'd have to do a lot of work if you wanted to change the story to make Pryor and Lewis
you'd have to
white.
Rescript Lewis's character if you were going to make him, like, not Jewish anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's just certain things that, like, well, this is the way the story is being told, and whether or not the actor identifies this way is not something that we should pressure them on. I think Broadway has honestly had to deal with this a lot longer than other industries, like I was saying. So it is super complicated, honestly.
And then Camilla brings up an interesting point here just about, and we can transition into some of her thoughts on particular actors and performances, which is kind of the last bit that she has. But she transitions into talking about Nathan Lane as Roy Cohn, which is a very fascinating casting choice.
Yeah.
And Nathan Lane, in contrast with Garfield or Pace, is very openly queer. And that is something that you, she says, you as an audience member going to see a Broadway show, you know who Nathan Lane is.
Yeah.
And what does that do to how you think about or look at Roy Cohn?
I think it's so fascinating to choose Lane for that role, because, like, Roy Cohn is a gay man, straight up, but it's a command of power that can be, like, someone like Nathan Lane can play that so flamboyantly or so openly, I guess is a better term, and also command the characters around him and the audience to not say anything about it and not acknowledge it. Like, that's the power of the character of Roy Cohn. He's like, yeah, I'm going to do all of the stuff, all the whatever you want to say, the mannerisms or just the act that way, but you can't say anything about it. That's Roy giving a back massage to the guy in the restaurant. It's the same vibe, but amplified when you actually have, like, because with Pacino, like, she talks about this, you come into that and you say, that's Al Pacino. He plays, like, macho, intimidating,
right,
angry, like, straight guys.
Yeah, when you cast Pacino, it makes the character about, like, the mask that Roy Cohn puts on.
Yeah.
Right. And the attitude that he has, or the way he bullies people and those kinds of things. And when you cast Nathan Lane, that's still a part of the character, but that's not what the character's about.
Right.
Which is an interesting sort of shift that's brought out by changing
I dig
the
it.
casting.
It's like a cool way how casting can completely change the way a character feels.
Yeah. And she just talks about how great his performance was, saying that he's not really, like, playing it as a comedian. He's playing it very honestly and using his comedy chops when it makes sense for the character. And Yeah, she says his Cohn's gayness doesn't feel buried so much. Instead, he uses his command of every room, like you were saying, and force of personality to simply demand that his gayness be unacknowledged. I think it's a potentially more sympathetic take, particularly when the character's health deteriorates, but it's also one that never tries to redeem the character's monstrousness. Very interesting.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. So then we get into Andrew Garfield as Prior Walter, which Camilla was not as hot on this performance.
Yeah. So she makes a good point that, sorry to interrupt you, but just that Andrew Garfield is a good actor. She likes him as an actor, thinks he's talented, thinks he can play it, but at least in her opinion, it often comes off as like we were saying, straight person playing the range of queer to show that off or to like go for awards bait, which worked because Andrew Garfield did win a Tony for this performance. So like the people who vote on the Tony Awards actually, at least as of that time, 2-3 years ago, do like that. And it's still appealing to a lot of people to like watch someone play this type of character.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating in its own right? To see someone who's like, I'm good at acting gay. Like, what does that even mean materially?
Yeah. And she balances that by talking about just, there's an inherent kind of like expert level skill as an actor that you need to have in order to have the stamina to perform Angels in America in its entirety in a day over and over and over again throughout its run. And so, it's not as if Andrew Garfield is like a novice or something. He's doing something that's incredibly difficult to do as an actor. But when it comes to the particular choices that he's making, I mean, we just watched, she linked to us a YouTube compilation of like clips out of context.
Yeah, from Angels in America, the play.
And we saw the moment where the book comes out of the floor in the hospital. And then we saw Andrew Garfield's reaction. And it was like, it just read from that brief snippet of us seeing it as like very stereotypically, like I'm going to flick my wrist and stuff like that. So I can see that criticism.
He's playing it at about the range of like that meme where you tell somebody, like Lil Nas X uses this meme a lot where it's like to show that someone's gay, you put a picture of SpongeBob with his wrist backwards. It's like, that's okay. I got it.
Yeah.
And it's funny when Lil Nas X does it, but when an actor's doing it on Broadway, it's like, well, sheesh.
And then the last person that Camilla talks about in depth and has detailed memories about is, she says, Daisy Chatz certified sweetheart, Lee Pace. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate
Camilla,
that.
For that callback. We love Lee Pace on here. And she basically confirms what my suspicion was, which is that Lee Pace is adorable and makes Joe Pitt even more precious.
That's honestly better casting. Did you know that the guy Patrick Wilson, who plays him in the show, that was like his first major acting role, or his like first like big acting
He
role?
looked really young in it.
Yeah,
so that makes sense.
But he just didn't have a lot of like credits under his belt at the time. But still, Lee Pace absolutely flawless casting.
Yeah, and he's 6'5", which I didn't know.
Oh, king tomboy.
And I really like Camilla's point here. I think this is fascinating. She says, he's so inherently likable, especially if your primary association with him is Ned the Pie Maker, that this makes for a really interesting cognitive dissonance in Joe's moments of cruelty towards Harper and his fascination with Cohn's Republican power broking. Pace brings some inherent sheepishness to those moments of coldness, which makes you hyper aware of both his self-loathing, but also reinforces that he has no delusions about how mean he's being. It makes him both more sympathetic and less sympathetic. He hates the idea of hurting other people, but does it intentionally anyway.
That's going to make me cry.
That feels a lot more nuanced than Patrick Wilson's performance, which kind of is like super innocent.
Yeah, and put upon.
Yeah. So
I wonder how they handle the ending with him in the play. We'll talk about it in the finale discussion, but I had problems with Joe Pitt's ending in the miniseries. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah. And then she ends with just some assorted thoughts. She doesn't really have specific memories of the folks who played Harper, Lewis, and Belize. Denise how do you think that's said? Goff?
It's probably Goff, but I would say
Goff like cough?
Yeah, Goff.
Denise Goff or Go, I'm not sure. James McArdle and Nathan Stewart Jarrett in that order. But she just remembers liking all of them and not necessarily knowing their previous work to be able to compare, or their later work to compare. And
what do I know James McArdle from, Magellan?
I don't know.
Sorry, keep talking.
And yeah, just overall, she sort of says like everybody was great.
I don't doubt it.
But yeah, a lot of really cool thoughts here from Camilla. I think with her permission, we could see if she's okay with us putting, this is almost like a mini dissertation on her experience or something, with links and gags and stuff in it. So I kind of feel like we should put it in the description
if she's comfortable with that.
If she's comfortable with it. So we'll ask her about that, and if she's cool with it, then we'll put it there so you all can read it yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you to Nick for getting the convo started. Thank you to Camilla for sharing your experience with us. You all, of course, in future seasons can send us emails as well, chatspod@gmail.com, and we will read them on the show. We read everything, so send us your thoughts. And that's that. Let's rejoin us to talk about the final part of Angels in America.
Perestroika, heaven, I'm in heaven.
Welcome back to Angels in Chatz America. I'm still here with Alan. Hey, Alan.
Hello. I'm on Broadway.
The second episode we watched this week was the final chapter of Angels in America, entitled Perestroika, Heaven, I'm in Heaven. It was directed by Mike Nichols, written by Tony Kushner. It aired on December 16th, 2003. Alan, what happens in this final part of Angels in America?
In this episode, a fight with Joe leaves Lewis scarred. Roy plays a final joke on Ethel Rosenberg. Pryor wrestles the angel. Pryor vows to live free of secrets. A flashback to 1990 shows us the final fate of our surviving characters. I added that last part because that's the most important part of the episode. Wow, yeah. Right? That's what I felt when watching this one was wow. Pretty cathartic, but not as cathartic as I expected.
Tell me more.
So, Hannah and Pryor are friends. Lewis finds out that Joe works with Roy Cohn. These are all things that we already knew from last episode that are now just like clicked in. Like, okay, it's now happened. Roy Cohn dies.
Yep.
He sees the ghost again. Belize has Lewis come over and save the cottage for Roy Cohn, which makes him feel morally complicated. Pryor goes straight to heaven. We get like all this heaven stuff. This is all things that last episode was building up to, but I felt like some of these catharses were a little flat, and I want to talk about them.
Yeah, well, why generally do you feel that way? Or is it a case-by-case situation?
It's a mostly case-by-case. I think that maybe the show never settled the difference between how much magic they wanted, like how much magical realism versus how much just like grounded realism we were going to have.
Yeah.
And I actually like that about it. I think it can have that wart of if I can call it that, or that flaw, and still be interesting because of that. But yeah, this felt like the end of a really good season of like a prestige drama, where it's like, all right, these things have wrapped up. We have our conclusion. All the stuff is in place, and then the time skip part felt like maybe unnecessary, maybe a little bit off character for some of these folks that we've come to know and love so well. That was where I felt the most complicated about it and felt like it sort of flattened out.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, the guys just spend the whole time talking about the Millenniums, the X-Files spinoff, which was like, guys, like, I don't know. That was weird. What about you?
Yeah, I definitely felt similarly. I mean, I think the message that comes at the end of this episode that the summary alluded to is really important and kind of gets back to stuff that we talked about in our first episode around the AIDS being not only a public health crisis, but also this sort of moral crisis, or not even a moral crisis for the people who have AIDS, but a moral crisis around like how it's depicted and how the people who have it are depicted. And you know, how political it is. Like it really feels like the play ultimately arrives at a place where it addresses those things and is about that in a way that I think makes sense, but it all feels really neat and clean and happy, and maybe that's good. Like, yeah, I was sort of coming into this expecting it to be bleak, and you know, I guess it's good that it isn't some sort of like tragedy porn kind of thing or something, but also I don't know, it just feels a little too easy, you know, because we only really see two characters who have AIDS in this story as far as we know, that being Roy Cohn and Pryor. And Roy Cohn dies a pretty rough death, but also was a pretty rough guy. And then Pryor, it's like, hey, turns out you're better off than most people, which kind of just makes you wonder, like, well, what about most people? You know?
That's a great point. I'm glad you said that. What is the... Sorry, to finish your point.
No, go ahead.
What's the message of Angels of America? What's the overall message here? My dad always says... you know, when you watch like a TV show, first of all, it has to be live action because animation is for chumps. And second of all, he says every story needs to have a message for you to take home. Everything, any piece of art that you enjoy.
Your dad says this?
Yeah, I've debated him a lot on this because I believe that art can exist for the sake of the artist. It can exist for just entertainment. I watch a lot of anime, you know, like, so, I'm not to say that anime is not thought-provoking, but it often is, but sometimes you just watch a thing because it's fun. And my dad will always say, like, no, you have to be able to pull a lesson out of it or something. I think Misa, to quote Jar Jar Binks, Misa thinks that this story is trying to tell us that even like the strongest form of resistance that you can perform as a gay man in the 80s with AIDS is to live, is to survive wholeheartedly and live your life and not give in to despair and cynicism, and don't be Roy Cohn. He dies, he gives into despair and cynicism, he dies a sad death. The world moves on without him. He doesn't get to go to San Francisco. Be like Pryor. You get to go to the fountain, you get to be with your friends who love you and care about you, and your ex's, or not your ex's, your boyfriend's ex's mother. So bizarre.
And then the nurse is like, this is New York in the 80s, and even that's weird, or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or be Harper and choose life and choose to move on and choose to like live your life and see what it has for you. I found that fascinating. I also, as a religious person, I'm going to talk about Pryor now because I wanted to save all the Pryor stuff for the end because it's some of the best stuff. But so my favorite scene of this whole series happens in this episode, and it's where Pryor is talking to the different angels of the various nations of the world.
Yeah, he goes to heaven. So Pryor has conversations with Hannah, with Joe's mom, about, okay, in the Bible, are there stories of prophets who reject the word of God, and how do you do that? And then
she's like, they get fed to whales.
Yeah, and then there's this whole scene where the angel comes down and some stuff happens, and we can talk about that later. But it results in Pryor being able to go to heaven to basically say to the angels, like, I don't want to be the prophet of your particular message. And then,
it gives them the book back. You guys can take the book back. They're like, it's easier here. You're going to keep suffering. He says, I don't want to suffer anymore. They're like, sure. Okay, you don't have to. You can just die. You can just be in heaven and stay with us and be our prophet and appear or whatever. And he's like, no, but if suffering means that I don't, or if sacrificing my life is what it takes to be free of suffering, then I don't want it. I stubbornly and wholeheartedly choose humanity over despair. And over death. Not even despair, but over death. Like a sort of, this is a very religious view of death, right? The whole, death is not a bad thing. It's a passing on. It's another phase. Yeah. And he instead says, no, the earthly world is where I belong. It's similar to Harper's final speech where she's talking about how it's molecules and things can repair themselves. You know, death is not forever, and harm and like pain are not forever. These are emotions and things in us that can change. And that's the beautiful thing about humanity. He chooses momentum. But then he also decides to twist the knife, and maybe it's comedic, but it's played pretty seriously in the episode where he's like, tell God if he comes back that we're suing his ass because he abandoned us.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, again, to quote Jar Jar Binks, Misa thinks that you can have both of these things. You can choose life and choose God. I wanted to like talk to Pryor at that moment, which is like the highest honor I can give to a piece of art is to say, I want to talk to these characters and like hang out with them, or I want to like have a discussion with this guy.
Yeah.
Because I think those things can contradict each other. Debate me, liberal.
Am I the liberal?
Listener, we took like 20 minutes.
Tell me more about that. What do you? Because it does seem like it's presenting. Well, I don't know. Just say more about that.
Yeah, like I think that you can embrace a sort of faith, and I don't know where Pryor was coming out with his faith before this series, but you can embrace God and embrace like him allowing you to live life. It doesn't have to be about dying. Maybe he's worrying as a gay man with AIDS that like, yeah, maybe God does want me to die, and maybe that's what he's manifesting as these people in heaven being like, just come with us, it's fine. But I think the truth of the matter isn't reject God or reject heaven. It's instead to accept that the thing that we're given here is from him. The good things that we get on earth and the humanity, that's him as well. That's where I disagree with Pryor Walter here. Is it seems like he is saying, I reject what God is giving to me, and instead I choose to live a lowly, difficult life because I chose it of my own volition. Well, is that atheist? Is that Christian? What's going on there?
I think what complicates it is that God is just absent from the whole story, right? Like it's not God who's sending him the message. It's not God who's inviting him to heaven. It's the denizens of heaven themselves. Mm-hmm. And God isn't there, and he doesn't seem to be on earth either. So I think that's what kind of complicates it a little bit. But I hear what you're saying, that for a show that is, or for a story, a play, a show, all of that is so much about faith and interrogating faith. It's about Judaism. It's about Mormonism. It's about just spirituality absent from a religious tradition. It's kind of hard to put your finger on where it lands in terms of like what the place of faith is in our lives. I don't know. I think you could read it as ultimately being this kind of agnostic story of, it doesn't matter what our relationship with the afterlife is because the life that we have on earth is so special and different from those things. But I don't know. Because the God, like Sue God stuff, when I heard him say that, I was like, okay, this is kind of a stupid joke. That's how I took it. Yeah.
But he said it to the angels. Like I think he means it. And that's where I'm like, do you? There's some contradictory stuff here. For example, when he wakes up from that dream, and Belize and Hannah and then Lewis are all there. After everybody else leaves, it's just him and Lewis, and they're talking about like, falling in love is not the same as loving. We need to be in love with each other. And they're like, yes, I do love you, and I love you back. But Lewis, I can't let you come back. Like, I don't want you back.
Well, and I think Lewis said, didn't he say failing in love also? Like he was talking
failing
about...
in love. Sorry, yes. I actually just misread my notes. Failing in love is not the same as loving.
He says failing in love and not loving someone are not the same thing. And what Lewis is sort of coming to is he was using this excuse of like, I can't do it, I failed, to get out of whatever the relationship of love or the obligations and that sort of thing. And he's sort of realizing like, oh, you can fail and then try again. And that's what I should have, that's what I should have done. So let's do that. And Pryor says, no, no, thank you.
But then they're together at the end of the series.
They're friends.
Okay.
At the end. I don't think they're together. They're friends.
Just like they're friends with Belize. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on there.
I definitely prefer that. I think that's the most mature adult way to handle this. Because like in this episode, I think Pryor says to like a doctor or something, he's like, I'm 30. Like I haven't seen life yet. I still have like 100 Lewises in front of me and relationships and things. And as long as I survive, I can have those experiences. These are still young people with a lot of life ahead of them. And they are acknowledging that, finally realizing that. But I know you and I have like explicitly talked about this recently, but being in your late 20s, you kind of feel like, oh God, did I use the time well? I've just been kind of like running with my head down. And I look up and I realize I'm 28 or whatever. And I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah. I mean, and that feeling is only hastened when you
turn
have
30.
Or
when you have AIDS. Yeah,
right?
yeah. Life is like is laid out in front of you, and you just went to heaven. Like,
yeah.
Talk about feeling the expanse of life there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think the whole, we're gonna sue God thing. Maybe it's just sort of about like, I don't know. I wonder if there's something to be said for the idea of religion sort of diverting our attention or distracting our attention or diverting our sense of value and energy towards like a mortal life, a mortal life. I mean, not immortal. Because I think sometimes if you're a religious person, you can sort of take solace in the idea of like, yeah, life sucks, but one day we're going to get to die and go to heaven. And the show sort of talks about how, because what the angels want is for time to stop moving, right? Basically. And that is, I think, as we discussed last week, kind of like a conservative position. And, religious traditions can tend to be conservative and maybe seek for that to happen. And there's this way that the show equates stopping time or exiting time with death. And so the sue God thing maybe has to do with like, there's this thing that we've been made to believe that is making us feel abandoned or making us feel like we need to stop moving or making us feel like, death is something to save us from this or something. And we should just stick a middle finger up at that and cherish and live life. And I guess what you're saying is like, maybe that's like a bad way to perceive of God. But yeah.
Can I be really real for a minute and get like kind of real talky for a bit?
Yeah.
So I feel comfortable talking about this. Beginning of quarantine, April, May 2020 or something like that. Not beginning, but like early enough. I was in a rough spot. I felt like my life was stagnating before quarantine, and then it kind of exacerbated things. I had a day or two there where I went to work and then got home after like, I finished work at 4 and then I get home by like 5 or 6. I slept through the evening, the entire evening, and then just woke up the next day and did it again. Did it for like 2 or 3 days because I was like, I don't want to move. I don't want momentum anymore. The world is not providing me an opportunity for momentum. I give up on doing this. This is a sort of like, and what I came to realize is that is a form of death. And there is something, and this is what I was saying earlier when I was like, let's English class this. What's the point of angels in America? There's something inherently American about desperately desiring to be somewhere else and be going forward somewhere. Whether or not, like, and acknowledging that what the present is bad but has beauty to it. That is where I think I actually agree with, like, Pryor is one of the most inherently American characters in this. Him and Belize are like living the experience of what being American is like, is wishing for something better. And acknowledging like, well, this kind of sucks, but I'm going to keep doing it. Because, my experience at like my brief time in Europe, it's like a lot of people just get comfortable and are like, enough is provided to me. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and be happy. And that's valid. But there's something core to the American identity about saying this is not enough. I could do a little bit more. There's problems with that. Capitalism infects that mindset and makes you think I could make a little bit more. I could make a little bit more than XYZ. But I think there is something good and beautiful and maybe American about just wanting to go somewhere and wanting to live a little bit longer and see what the next day is going to hold for you, even if it sucks.
Yeah. There, Alexis de Tocqueville writes about that a little bit in his book Democracy in America. He's like this 1800s French social commentator who comes to the United States in the 1840s, I think, and writes about it. And there's one bit in what he writes about where he talks about how American people, as a rule, just seem very restless.
Yes.
Like they have, at that time, there was a better standard of living in the United States than in Europe in the 1840s for like the average person, the average white person, I should say.
Yeah.
And he's like, and they're dissatisfied with it, because it's like, well, but I could have a better version of this, or did I make the right choices, or this and that. And I think that's something that could even be offered as a critique of what Angels in America is saying too, of like pausing time or being outside of time doesn't have to be bad necessarily.
Yeah.
Like there could be ways to do that and accomplish that are good. And this sort of devotion to like, we're always moving forward, we're always having new experiences. Just there's nuance to it, right? And like you're saying, there's a beauty to it, but also a kind of like a kind of capitalist drive to it as well.
Well, and this is what leads to the downfall of characters like Joe Pitt, is that he discovers a new experience that he feels was always in him, and he says, "Oh, this was missed life experience. I need to go back and a common experience that from people I know who discover that they're queer later in life is the feeling of a missed childhood or a missed sex teenage years or something like that." And Joe desperately wants to like capture so many things, and none of the people in life can provide all of it for him. And so his desire doesn't fit into the framework of like being a husband or being a boyfriend, because he wants too many things. He is the excess of this American ideal that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I agree with that.
It's intense, and to briefly talk about Harper's stuff here, I really like her final scene. I mentioned in I think the first episode that one scene from this whole miniseries that came up on my YouTube recommended like legitimately 10 years ago, I think, was this final scene where her final scene where she's on the airplane, looking out the window, talking about the molecules and life. And it's like, it's a very...
It's just so odd to me that you watched this scene out of the context of the show.
It's so weird out of context.
Yeah.
Because it's like, where is she going? Why is she leaving even? Like, what was the purpose of all of that? But I think you could definitely read that scene in isolation as like good monologues. And that's probably the context that I found it in. Was I must have been looking up like best monologues in TV or something.
Probably, yeah.
Because it's fun. It's well delivered. Mary Louise Parker is a good actress, but monologues are just monologues. Like, it just kind of feels like, and this is what I thought about the series, and I'm gonna go to California where I can start my life over, and like, good for her, but again, it's the thing you're talking about where you're like, okay, I guess you're happy, that's good. That's how I felt with the time skip too, where I was like, all right, I guess we're all friends and we're in a play now. This is great for you guys. We're talking about Gorbachev.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Roy Cohn for a bit, bud?
Sure, that sounds good.
So he's singing in bed, he's dying. He's singing about John Brown, which I thought was funny. If you're a patron, you heard us talk about it, the Good Lord Bird, many months ago, actually. Ethel Rosenberg appears to him to tell Roy that he's being disbarred once and for all. And I love that he debates her. He's like, no, but like the legal board decides. And she's like, yep, the legal board decided summarily that you're being disbarred. Like, they did it. And he's like, no, but like the other guys. And she's like, yeah, they did too. And she's like, wait, really? And she's like, yeah, they also did it because they knew you were gay, bud. They've literally all known you were gay the whole time. Your whole like ruse about hiding your sexuality and all this is not working. And everybody on the legal council knows.
Yeah.
Meryl Streep as Ethel gets a lot of like sort of satisfaction out of this whole scene. I loved a lot of this. This really calls into question whether or not we feel sympathy for Roy, though. Do you, at the end of the series, Magellan, feel sympathy for Roy Cohn?
I think it's a really tricky question, because I think what really complicates it for me is that the way that the story talks to us about forgiving Roy Cohn is through Belize. Mm-hmm. And I heard about this new show that's about the group of people affected by the AIDS crisis in England in the 1980s. Oh, yeah. And it's like brand new on HBO. It's called like It's a Sin or something like that. And I haven't watched it, but I've heard good things from some of my coworkers. If people want to, continue watching HBO shows about this topic after this is over. But I was reading some criticism on it, and there was this article. It might have been AV Club, or it might have been somewhere else. I actually can't remember. Where they were basically saying that It's a Sin has a similar problem to Angels in America, where the characters who are suffering from having AIDS are white. And so even though It's a Sin is like better or has more of a diverse cast or whatever, there's just something inherent about when a character is suffering from something, we have sympathy for them, right? Because we're watching them go through this experience. And the article is basically making the case of like, people of color deserve to suffer on screen too.
Not exclusively, but yes.
No, yeah, right. It's saying like, in these stories where it's only the white people who are suffering from AIDS or whatever, like there is something to be said for the fact that you should have more people who are also suffering. And so, you know, you think about that in the context of Angels in America, where the two characters who we see suffering from having AIDS are Roy Cohn and Pryor. And I just don't know how I feel about it, because it ends up like really making you feel bad for Roy Cohn as you watch him die and you watch Meryl Streep sing to him. But then, of course, right away, he's like, haha, I fooled ya. I gotcha. I'm a bastard and now I'm dying. So it's not all that bad. But it just feels a little bit weird to me that we like spend so much time watching Roy Cohn die and we don't see that happen to any of the people who his policies and politics like put in a similar or much worse position than him, you know?
Yeah. The article, by the way, just to declare for people, it's from Vulture. It's
from Vulture. That's what it was. Yeah.
It's a Sin's clear-eyed look at the AIDS crisis has one big blind spot, and it's by Catherine Van Arendonk.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. But yeah.
So I feel conflicted about the fact that not only is there this tone of, all right, well, he was a horrible man, but we got to forgive him, but also that it is the one main character of color who is like the voice of that perspective.
Like, why does he have to forgive him? Why is it placed on the shoulders of Belize to forgive this horrible piece of crap?
Right. That's what I'm saying. And like it is, you know, it's an act of strength on Belize's part, but it also, from this sort of more meta perspective, you know, his character is being used as a tool to communicate this particular message. It's not like he's a real person who's mustering up this act of forgiveness. Yeah. He's a character created by it's fiction. We made it up. He's written by a writer to have this role in the story.
Elicit empathy from the viewer.
So I don't know. I'm conflicted about it. I think I believe generally in the idea of forgiveness, and I do feel somewhat bad for Roy Cohn as being a sort of like prisoner of his own hatreds and his own world and his own cynicism, and not really being able to like live a life truly as himself, and instead living this life just filled with like bitterness and hate and stuff. Like I feel bad, but not that bad.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, what I will say is I don't feel that bad I don't think that Belize is that bad off for example, misappropriating the Jewish like funeral rites ceremony to steal precious medicine for his dying friends. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point. A difficult decision he had to make. And I'll say this though about Roy, the religious part of me says that, I'm never going to say that I'm glad that Antonin Scalia died, or that I'm going to be happy when Donald Trump dies, or that I'm going to be happy that Roy Cohn died, whatever. It's an overall good thing that he died. I'm not like taking personal joy on it, and I don't wish for him to suffer, but the world is better off without him. And Belize is using this opportunity to give himself a sort of peace of mind that the rest of his life is not going to give him, by taking this medicine, by reading they're doing the funeral rites stuff, all of that, by being like, okay, well, he's not hurting him. He didn't speed him along. He didn't kill Roy. He did everything he needed to do. At the end of the day, in my view of Christianity, God judges Belize positively in this moment.
Definitely.
You know?
Yeah. No, I think that I think it's a good point. Like Belize, nursing Roy and relieving him of as much suffering as possible, and then also Belize taking the medicine and giving it to people who really need it. I think all of that reflects very, very well on Belize. Yeah. So I agree with you there.
The show feels what I'm saying here, right? Because Roy is dying. He sees the Ethel hallucination. He starts talking to her as if she's his mother. And you're like, oh God, he is so far gone. And she's like, I'm not your mother. Like, it's so fascinating that his hallucination is confused. I thought that was hilarious. She's like, why are you calling me your mom? This is so weird. I guess you're just gone. He closes his eyes and she sings to him this beautiful song in Yiddish. And it's like, oh, he finally apologizes to her. He says, I'm sorry. And then she sings to him. And then she like finishes her song and he jerks upwards and goes, haha, just kidding. And then just actually dies. And that's the moment where you're like, okay, I wasn't supposed to feel bad. I wasn't supposed to feel bad. The show is telling me you are okay for feeling all right that this guy died.
Yeah, that's a good point. That moment is what I think, saved it for me. Because if he had just died with Ethel Rosenberg giving this like beautiful little song, that would have felt
well, because then it would have been like, oh, I'm sorry, Ethel, and that's his final moment as he talks to his ghost, like so cheesy and bad.
Yeah,
but the fact that he's like, haha, is like, let this guy die. This is okay.
It's also it's a funny little pun where he says, I just wanted to see if I could finally make Ethel Rosenberg sing.
Yeah,
because like he wanted to make her sing, like make her confess. But singing.
But also like literally sing. He also recounts his first lines of the series. His last lines are, next time around, I don't want to be a man, I want to be an octopus.
Yeah.
Which is the first thing he said in the show, or something along those lines.
Yeah, when he was like answering the phone or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was anything going on there, or if that was like actually Roy Cohn's final words. I have no idea. I wasn't able to find that answer.
I'm not sure.
So Roy does actually die. Belize uses Lewis, has him. So what was the idea with saying the prayer? What was the purpose of that? Was it so that they could say like, oh, he donated it or something?
No, I think Belize just like felt like he needed, like, I think Belize sees this guy. I mean, maybe on the one hand, it's Belize feels a little bit guilty about taking the medicine and wants to even the scales a little bit.
Right.
That could be part of it. I think what Belize says is probably actually more accurately what it is, which is he says, look, he was a terrible guy, but he died a really hard death. And we need to commemorate him, or at least forgive him or something. We need to give him some shred of dignity here, because Lord knows there's nobody else who's going to do it, right? Like, this is Roy Cohn. Who's out there waiting for him?
Nobody.
To give him a proper funeral or whatever.
I'm sure several people are dancing right now. As a matter of fact.
Like Ethel Rosenberg basically says, like, those guys who disbarred you did it gleefully. They were happy that it happened. Totally. So I think Belize just sort of sees like this is just an act of human decency that every person deserves. So help me, give him this proper Jewish prayer.
Lewis channels the spirit of Ethel in this moment also. They like do the prayer back and forth. That must have been really hard to film too, because they're both delivering it and then pausing. I guess that they just did it together and they like synchronized.
Well, they're
like
in
that.
They're in the same shot.
Yeah, that's true.
I think they're just literally standing next to each other saying it.
But I like the framing of that a lot. I also like that Belize was actually a little bit spiritual here and said it doesn't count if it's easy. Because Lewis is like, this feels really uncomfortable for me. I don't know the prayer that well. My parents would hate me, not only because they already hate me because I'm gay, but also because I'd be saying a prayer for Roy Cohn.
He describes his parents as New Deal pinkos, which is funny.
Awesome. Rock and roll. Love your parents.
Yeah. And Belize is talking about just the act of forgiveness. Like, an act of forgiveness being easy kind of makes it
defeats the point.
That significant. I wasn't sure how I felt about Ethel Rosenberg being sort of with Lewis as he miraculously knows how to say the prayer. I didn't really get it, because like I guess that's also the ghost of Ethel Rosenberg feeling similarly to Belize, that like I'm going to forgive Roy Cohn and, be decent to him.
Mm-hmm.
But she just did that when she was singing to him, So it kind of felt like we're doing the same beat a second time.
But now featuring Lewis.
Yeah, but now featuring Lewis, and then it's sort of muddling, like this episode does a lot of muddling the like who is sort of connected to the supernatural stuff here, or who is connected to the visions and who isn't, because Lewis starts to perceive Ethel Rosenberg in some way. Hannah has visions of the angel just like Pryor does, and that, I don't know, I was just kind of confused by that whole thing. I thought it looked cool and it felt cool, but when I thought about it more, it's like, I don't really get this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, things I don't get, such as like Hannah in the hospital seeing the angel of America and like getting
like,
sent
yeah?
into the air and being like,
They give each other a look like, are we
doing this? And Emma Thompson's like, yes. And then Meryl Streep's like, I'm a Mormon in the 80s. I did love, by the way, in that scene, to jump there, Emma Thompson in her all black angel garb looked so good, so cool.
Oh, yeah.
And good. Angel aesthetics, I'm a fan, usually. So hilarious. And again, way funnier if the angel was on a string when Pryor is like, okay, Hannah, like, you told me all about religion and forgiveness, and you said, like, I'm allowed to reject this gift. What do I do now that the angel's in front of me? And she's just screaming, and she's like, you gotta, no items, Final Destination, 1v1, no Fox, no Samus. Like, yeah, you gotta wrestle her. Because that's what she read in her text. Like, she just knows the text of the books, of the Bible and whatnot.
Well, and it recalls the Joe in the second episode when he talks about that painting that he would always think about of like the guy wrestling the angel.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that's the connection there.
Yeah, they both read the same book.
Yeah, and they both were like, aroused by the same concept.
Exactly,
because she kind of is like peeking through her fingers, like, you gotta wrestle. Yeah,
do it. I'll watch.
Yeah, that kind of was the vibe that I got.
It was so weird. And then a fiery ladder comes down, and Pryor's like, all right, I guess I'm going up. I'll see you later. Bye. Like, this is the magical realism that I wanted this whole show to be like. Where he's like, okay, there's a hole in my roof and a ladder that's on fire, but I can touch it. All right, sure. I'll go to heaven and talk to them real quick. Be right back.
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes back. He does that whole amazing scene. He talks about all the stuff that I was saying earlier about how, like, I want momentum and I want to go forward. But then he says motion is modernity. It's animate. I love all of this stuff here about how, like, to go forward is to be American, to be modern, to be progressive. We have to go places. And then he says that he has an addiction to being alive, which that hit me really hard. That was one of the other moments that I was like, But then the fact that there's something sad about the fact that he wakes up and just thinks that this was all a dream. And it's like, we were like fully committed to the reality of this. And now it's relegated to his dreamscape, I guess.
Does that change it for you, though?
Not much. It changed the tone of that scene. But, like, in the Bible, a lot of these things are visions that other people don't believe. They don't, like, dwell on it too much because the story's not about that. But the Bible's not about that. But, like, yeah, they're not always framed as being real. That the end result is, like, he does literally come down and does literally do miracles, but sometimes you have a vision and you're like, this seems like a thing I should leave my life on, and you just do it, regardless of whether or not it's real. So I guess that's true. It doesn't really, like, change it for me. But yeah, I really, really, really love this scene. Justin Kirk, again, top of his career work here. I liked all the stuff with the angels. I liked the angel of Asiatica. I liked Lewis with a beard angel. That was cool. The Angel of Australia, which I really wish that Meryl Streep was like, hello, mate. All of our Australian listeners. And I like that all the angels say I, just for consistency's sake, for script consistency. Why is it chilly in heaven, Majan?
I I guess because maybe it was just chilly where they filmed it. No, it's probably because it's it communicates this sense of like stagnancy.
You really just English classed it. You did it. I'm gonna give you 100 points for that one. That's really good.
I mean, yeah. It just made me think also about how The Good Place really was just kind of like, it's either a great minds thing or they were borrowing some stuff from Ancient America in the way that they conceived of heaven as like a boring place for boring people.
100%. 100%. That's where the normies hang out.
Yeah. And The Good Place kind of arrives at a similar conclusion. I won't spoil anything, but this sort of like defiant, triumphant acceptance of just the course of human existence and life as a thing, and living a life from the beginning to the end as just something to cherish. It feels like a lot of stories that kind of get metaphysical arrive at that conclusion. And I wonder about that sometimes as like how valid is that? Like maybe actually living in heaven would be pretty bomb. And we're just sort of down here on earth making our movies and our plays and telling ourselves that life is worth living because it's what we got, Well,
you make a good point, but how do you get to heaven? You have to choose to not do this one anymore. And that's the part that a lot of this heavenly moralizing is telling you not to do, is don't choose that. If it happens to you, it's fine. But, it's kind of, and some sects of Christianity will twist that and say that suicide is evil, which is harmful in its own way. But yeah, I think that's what the story wants you to think about.
I think I'm just sort of saying, like, as someone who's not religious, I don't really believe there's any sort of afterlife. So I do think that like our lives are what we have, and we have to sort of find value in them. But I think it's like, I don't know. I guess I get cynical sometimes about stories that take this sort of swelling orchestral music tone of like, and I choose to
life
because life. But it is a beautiful thing. Maybe I just wasn't in the right space for it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's valid. And it doesn't help that this show then jumps 10 years, several years later.
Yeah.
To 1990. And so...
Can we, before we talk, there's one, I think, major thing that we skipped, and then we can talk about that, which is the fight between Lewis and Joe.
Oh my God. I blocked it out. I blocked it out because it was so dark. Literally, the lighting is so dark.
Because conspicuously, when we go into that conclusion in 1990 and we get this kind of like reflection on the morals of the play and this very, I think, hopeful, happy ending, the characters who are there are Pryor, Lewis, Belize, and Hannah. Harper's not there, so I guess she, fucked off to San Francisco and is living her happy life or whatever. And Joe is not there, which we were addressing in the previous half. And it seems like maybe part of the reason Joe isn't there has to do with how this scene plays out. So Joe, after he leaves Harper naked in their apartment at the end of episode 5, he goes to see Lewis to say like, hey, can I come in? Oh, it's good to see you. Just wanting to like be all lovey-dovey. And Lewis says, I've been doing some research, and Lewis has pulled the files on all of the legal decisions that Joe has ghostwritten for the judge that he clerks for. And it's this really tense fight where Lewis basically is saying, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Look at these decisions that you've decided and this ideology that you have carried out in law. It's not even just like you harmlessly believe some problematic stuff. It's like you wrote legal decisions that had an impact on people's lives, and I don't even know who you are. I don't even understand how you can seem like this decent guy, but then write things like this. And Joe's like, what? What are you talking?
No, what? No.
Wait, what? Wait.
I like that Joe finally accepts that he sometimes has a bit of a bad streak to him here.
Well, because they like get physical and then Joe starts kicking Lewis in the ribs.
Yeah, yeah.
It gets violent. I think there's a lot to unpack here, but this really, feels like Joe, unfortunately, falling into the mold of Roy Cohn a little bit, because before, the last time that he almost hit someone, it was Roy Cohn. And Roy is like, come on, break some laws, punch me in the face. And he chose not to. But here,
he totally chose to.
He chooses that, and he chooses to be violent. And so this seems like the moment where Joe kind of has his biggest failure.
Yeah. It's, again, like I was saying, I definitely think that this is Joe, like, kind of taking his ideology over being a good person. Because he's also talking about, like, the politics of, quote-unquote, people like Lewis. And, like, accepting that, like, okay, this was something I played around in, and I can empathize with you and I can be intimate with you, but I still fundamentally disagree with you emotionally and philosophically about how the world should be run. Which is ultimately, like, the core of a healthy relationship. And, like, they were never going to stay together because, end of the day, he's still a diehard Reaganite Republican. And Lewis is the child of what you were saying earlier, New Deal pinkos. So, like, this was never going to work, no matter how much he comes to terms with his homosexuality or his capacity for empathy. It's like, well, I don't think that people like us should exist, or I don't think that the government should run in a way that supports people that we care about. It's like, well, okay, it'll never work. Fine. Yeah. And they fight. Like, the fight, it's the classic thing of, like, the physical fight is a manifestation of them fighting ideologically. And but it literally is that. They literally are like...
Yeah. Lewis's physical scars are representation of his internal scars. And then Pryor's like, you take everything so literally.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is also Joe going down the path of Roy Cohn's kind of complete... the complete separation that he has between the power that he holds and uses and the effect that it has, right?
Yeah.
Because Joe's response to Lewis is like, come on, this is law, not justice. I'm not gonna, he basically says, like, I'm not just gonna do what's right, because that's not what the law is. Because he writes that the decision that really stood out to me is this case of a guy who was gay, goes into the army, and then is dishonorably discharged shortly before he was going to be honorably discharged and have, like, his pension and all those benefits and stuff.
Yeah.
And the lower court ruled that that's a violation of the 14th Amendment because you can't discriminate against people who are gay. And Joe's decision completely removes, in the appeals court, completely removes that reasoning. And, like, says, like, no, being gay isn't a protected class or protected status under the 14th Amendment. It's just this one particular case, things are turned out, we should rule in his favor because of a technicality or whatever. And that is an incredibly significant thing for him to do that damages people's lives. And his refusal to sort of, like, be accountable to that or recognize the power that he used or chose to use there is a significant moral failing on Joe's part.
It's absolutely on the level of, like you said, Roy and Ethel Rosenberg. You had the option to not do this. You chose to do it. And by choosing to do it, by working within this corrupt system and twisting it in that way, you are consigning yourself to exist within it. You can't do anything else.
And I think I just wish that there had been a moment where Joe could sort of, like, come to Jesus about that stuff.
Yeah.
And try to make things right. And the play just kind of says, like, no, you did what you did, bud.
I just think that we're complaining about the happy ending, but then we're also complaining about the sad ending here. Right? Because we're saying the stuff in the 90s is too neat and happy, and we're saying this is too unfortunate. Like, why didn't he have a coming to Jesus moment? And it's like, what do we want?
That's fair.
We should allow main characters that we like and appreciate in our story to have bad endings because they did it. It's their fault. You know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think there's a bit of nuance to that. It does feel good.
I think the thing that bothers me then is just that, like, it feels like Joe is being singled out. You know what I mean?
He's the only one who gets that bad ending.
But you make a good point that like there's space for both things and there's space for the nuance there.
And so in the jump, Hannah gets off at Clark Street Station, goes to Central Park. We're all a little bit older and colder, and Pryor is on a cane. He's got some facial hair, and they just crack the fourth wall open. They're talking about the Berlin Wall. They're talking about the rise of Gorbachev. It's Pryor's birthday, and they're all like, "We're gonna go hang out by the statue of Bethesda," and he just like jumps out of the, like, literally does like the theater fourth wall thing and speaks to the audience and says, "Check out this statue. This is my favorite place in the entire universe." Because this statue represents like a cleansing that he's wanted so badly since episode 1. Since moment 1 that we've known Pryor, he's wanted to be like washed of his sins or washed of his illness or everything. And Bethesda to him represents the ability to do that. By the way, I was telling Michelle this, we're going to try to visit this statue at some point next time in New York because it seems really pretty. I want to go. And he says like it's really beautiful in the summer because it's winter right now and it's not flowing, but in the summer they turn the water on. And I was like, damn, that sounds dope. Lewis then climbs out of frame to tell us about the story of Bethesda, and then Belize comes out of frame to talk about the healing magic or whatever. And then Hannah is like, I want to be out of frame. She comes out. They just kind of start rambling about like themes and stuff, and then our final note is Pryor. I don't have the lines here exactly, but Pryor basically saying that people like him, young gay people in the 80s, and in all of history, shall not be forgotten. We're going to continue to live, and we're going to continue to tell our stories like this because we don't want to be invisible statistics anymore. Yeah, which I think is a great message to end on.
And it's sort of, I think the power of the ending here, and at least the lesson that I got from it, is we talked in our first episode about and I think I was rambling about this a little bit earlier also, but the way that having AIDS in the 80s is so closely tied with a feeling of like shame or a feeling of being shunned or guilt or all sorts of other things. And it seems like the thing that allows Pryor to live on, it has to do with what Harper says to him in the first episode in the dream sequence, where she's like, there's a little part inside of you that's completely free of disease. And that part of you is like, whatever, your soul or whatever it is. But just this sense that like your body is sick, but that's all it is, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what Hannah says to him at one point too, where she sees his lesions and she's like, that's a cancer. That's all it is. That's nothing not you. More.
There's something human about that, she says.
Yeah. And I think that Pryor's able to accept that and come to terms with that by the end of the show, to say like, you know, I have this illness, but I can live on without shame, and not just without shame, but I can live on and be proud of who I am and enjoy the life that I have and the life that I have left. And I think that that's a really beautiful message.
Only in politics does the miraculous occur.
I don't know about that, Lewis. Lewis continues to just like be wrong about things.
Lewis is going to grow up as that like old, vaguely conservative Jewish guy who plays chess in the park, and you're like, why are you the way you are? And we're seeing it. We're answering that question.
Yeah, right.
Also, there's just so much weird comedy in that last scene, like the whole talking about the Golan Heights and whether or not Israel should be declared a state, and you're like, oh my god, 1990s here, y'all, like
yeah.
We're approaching the Gulf War, like we're doing all of it. Okay.
Yeah, right.
It felt like, I don't know how they do this in the play, but is it just like the actors are like, all right, just like talk politics for a couple minutes, and then while the curtains fade out, basically.
Yeah. I just from thinking about this play, I think that, you know, this is a period piece, right? And it's a period piece of the 80s, but it's also dealing with ongoing American ideas and immigration and Mormonism and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think all of it has felt timeless, except for the part where they're talking about how great Perestroika is. Yeah, Russia's really taking a good turn. It's going to be so great. And the world is looking up.
It felt like they
such
forgot to explain why this half is called Perestroika, and then they're like, "Oh, shit! So it's It's a reset. It's a Soviet reset. It's good. We want a reset because we want our lives to reset. That's a good thing, right? They're doing it."
And Lewis is like, Gorbachev is the greatest political thinker since Lenin or something like that. It's like, okay, all right, I guess. I don't really quite understand this, like, 1990 liberalism that you've got cooking, but okay, sounds good.
I support you in all that you do. But
yeah, it just, that part felt really dated, like this sort of sense of like 1990, a new dawn of perfect society or whatever from our perspective here in 2020, you know?
I think,
but yeah.
I think as a concluding point about Angels in America as a series, because I want to start talking about concluding points here. Yeah. The series is awesome. You got to watch it. It's beautiful. Oh, yeah. You're going to cry so many times if you haven't already been watching with us. As a period piece, I think it mostly really works. It, especially like the Joe and Harper plot line, is basically pulling all these different headlines about stay-at-home moms who will become drug addicts and closeted homosexual dads and the Supreme Court and Roy Cohn and the AIDS crisis. Like, it manages to congeal a bunch of headlines into a cohesive story. Yeah. And I think that works really well for it. I think often plays do that kind of thing where they're like, what's relevant right now? What's going to be successful on Broadway right this second? And, you know, it works for them. But where I'm curious about this, and maybe you can speak this too, is like this, why'd they make this miniseries? Why'd they do this in the aughts? Is it just because it's a well-regarded thing? But like, what is it about 2004 that they were like, this is the time to adapt 2003, where they were like, this is the time to adapt Angels in America?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what would have animated that in 2003. I could tell you definitely what would animate a choice like that in 2017 or 2020 or something like that. Or
1991 when the play came out.
Yeah, well, when 1991 when the play came out, I mean,
it's extremely relevant.
Yeah. But I don't know, maybe people were feeling in 2003 with America entering into the war on terror and this sort of like a resurgence of or continued glorification of like 1980s Reaganist Republican ideology. At least politically, I'm sure Angels in America felt fresh. It felt as fresh to that moment as it does to us in the post 2016 moment. So I would guess that that's what's going on there, but also maybe it's just HBO's like looking around for things to turn into movies.
Yeah, it's a return to empathy too. It's like, hey, with the war on terror going on, and with America feeling more and more splintered than ever post 9/11, because that's where this is obviously centering itself. Yeah. A, we're afraid of planes. Let's put a Harper enjoying a plane scene at the end for the kids. And B,
God,
I'm just saying. And B, let's remember that there are people out there who are living harder lives than we are. Like, that's why, Pryor is like, oh, I have AIDS and I'm a like dying man, but people with worse lives than I do wake up every single day and choose to live. And that's incredible to me. And like, yeah, you should remember that, especially as like a privileged white person watching HBO in 2003. You got to remember every once in a while that like gay people exist and they're suffering a lot, and they have suffered historically for so long. And, reminding you to be, I think, that's one of the biggest strengths of art is encouraging empathy, engendering empathy. So I think that's where it works in 2003, but that's what I got.
Definitely.
Did you have fun?
I did. I mean, this was very rewarding to me as an American history interested person, because I don't know if someone who's not American or who doesn't have the sort of context of American history would really appreciate this as much, because it does feel more than anything else American, I think. Like, every character has some relationship to Americanness or trying to figure out what it means for them in some way. The play is very preoccupied with that. And it depicts this moment that's like a crossroads of American political, moral problems that is both of its time and also accessible to similar crossroads moments. Yeah. Like, maybe people in 1996, when it's like, come on, Bill Clinton's president, everything's fine, don't worry about it, would go to Angels in America and be like, yeah, whatever, man. But I feel like now, 2021, if people haven't seen this, in the wake of the Trump presidency and COVID and, uprising over racial injustice and police brutality, and just like our now 30 more years of experience with gender and sexuality and how we've treated those things in this country, all of that just, I think, enriches the experience of watching this. So if you've been wondering, like, does that hold up, or like, that seems old, I think it's the kind of text that, like, the more time that passes and the more context that passes, the more you can kind of pour into it and get something from it.
Absolutely. And we didn't know when we recorded Vanity Chats what the 3 series comprising the miniseries season would be for us. But between Vanity Fair, Angels in America, and what we're going to be talking about next time, I think we are kind of like painting this picture of what it means to be human, and like what society does to people, and how you can like manipulate your way around society for good and for evil. I think that's one of the broader points to enjoy about this too. Is like, oh, this is a like story about queer folk, a story about the AIDS tragedy, about Republicans, about closeted folk. There's a lot that of like corners of society that other stories don't talk about that are in Angels in America. So it's really useful in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, before we talk about that, actually, you know what? Let's do it, John. Tell me what we're watching next time.
So we are shifting gears. And we are watching our final mini-series for this season 11, and that is The Stand, the 1994 adaptation of The Stand, not the new one.
No, God, no.
I mean, I might check out the new one just to dip in and see what it's all about, but
sure,
we're not watching it for the podcast. We're watching the 1994 original miniseries. And next time we're going to be watching the 2 parts of the 4 parts, which are called The Plague and The Dreams. Yeah. So
very exciting.
For that.
Do we want to actually, let's do plugs. Let's do plugs. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do plugs.
Sweet. I want to take half these and I want to give you the second half, because we usually just fully split it one way or the other. Okay. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, please head over to chatspod@gmail.com. I know you can't head over to an email address, but do your best. chatspod@gmail.com.
You smart ass.
Yeah, big dummies. Do head over to Twitter, specifically at Chatspod, where you can get at us there. We have a subreddit community run. It's reddit.com/r/Chatspod. We have fans over there doing re-listens of old episodes. And we have rate us on Apple Podcasts. Sorry, I received a phone call. How dare I? Rate us on Apple Podcasts, your podcast platform of choice. We've got a Patreon, guys. But John, tell them about the Patreon, please.
I would love to. You can support us over at patreon.com/chatspod at one of 3 potential tiers. The $1 tier gets you access to some old bonus episodes, as well as my solo coverage of the X-Files entitled The Chatz Files, and then some other bonus episodes that we've released for everybody that are, some cool little gems. Then at $3 a month, you get access to our thrice monthly bonus content, which could be us doing nights episodes about particular topics or just fun discussions. Could be movie commentaries, or it could be us piloting new shows. And then at $5 a month, you're doing that because it gives you a cool color for your name on Discord. It's a status symbol. We're going to start thanking people at the end of the episodes if you got $5. So that's why you would do it at 5. And that's what we got.
And that's Angels in Chats America.
Yeah. Do you have a chatsum for this week?
I do. I certainly do. Hey guys, we haven't done a cultural chatsum in a while, but I'm going to implore you for something. If you care about surviving a virus and living and momentum and all that stuff, and you have it available to you, please get vaccinated for COVID-19.
Oh, yeah.
I know we shouldn't have to say it. I like to think that our listeners are well-informed and pro-science and all of that stuff.
And I would hope by this point in the month of May, you're
that
vaccinated.
You have. Well, that's the thing is, again, not trying
the
to
month
not
of
be American.
June, even. Sorry, we're in beginning of June now.
Mm-hmm. Trying to not be America-centric. There are other countries where it's taking a lot longer. Even like Canada has no platform yet to get it as of this recording in April. So if you have it available to you and you haven't gotten it already, please consider getting it. It doesn't really matter which one you get. I know one of them was recalled recently. It's a complicated issue there, but I don't want that to let people think that they don't need it or that they shouldn't get it or that they're stupid for getting it. There is a growing, surprisingly present amount of resistance to the COVID vaccine and the idea of getting vaccinated for it that is worrisome. And I hope that people can use your heads and just come on. It's not even don't you want to return to normal, but don't you want to be able to hug your family again and not wear a fucking mask all the time? Are you sick of the way a mask feels on your silly face? Get vaccinated for COVID-19. If you have it available to you, please do this for me. Thank you. That's my chat for this.
Yeah.
What about you, Megan?
I don't know.
You want to recommend that book, the French democracy book?
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is I had some beep and bop earlier today. So
ooh, good chatsum.
You should get yourself some of that, or make it.
Make it.
Good.
Make it. Okay,
it's a good
beautiful.
dish.
Make food. Enjoy vegetables. Enjoy various proteins if you want.
Yeah.
I love that. I love food and eating. Cool. Magellan, thank you for surviving with me.
Thank you.
Thank you for living. Thank you for listening to this episode of Angels and Chatz America. Peace.
Bye-bye.